So let's. Who's got something interesting to share with the group? No, we're not talking about slapping. Yeah. We'll do Cara first, and then Morgan, if you're desperate to have a chat about slapping profits, we can talk about that too.
I was just noticing the similarities between when he had a vision that he saw the Lord sitting on a throne. And it's similar to what happens with Job. You know, where God's going, hey, let's check this guy out. Who's going to go and entice him to kill the other dudes?
Yeah.
So there's this conversation going on, I suppose, is what struck me.
Yep.
It's similar to what happens with Job.
So here's a question for you then. What is? Well, obviously, maybe not obviously. Job is a very different. That might not even be fair to say. I think the majority of people would say Job is a very different type of literature. Some think it's probably more historical, and others would think it's more poetic. There's a middle ground and a term coined. Well, actually, I don't know if it was coined by, but a term used by David Pawson is that it might be factional. So it's a fiction story that communicates the facts around Job's suffering, something like that. Anyway, so just keeping that in mind. What are these conversations with God? Like, are they physical, historical events?
Who else is there? Who's he conversing with?
Yeah.
It mentions it later on in 2 Kings. It's got they stopped worshipping the Lord, they worshipped the other hosts of heaven. I think it's using the same sort of language.
It is. This one does talk about the hosts of heaven. Yep. Where?
Read it just earlier. It was in.
Chapter and verse.
I'll find it.
Yeah, that's the answer. You can't go singing the 2 Kings if you don't know it. The problem is he will be right.
I know he will be right. I've no doubt he will be.
Okay, well, Nathan can have a scratch around for that. We'll keep going. What did you want to say, Morgan?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no chocolate. Okay, well, anything else from that table? Tom, what about you?
I was just staggered by the amount of people that the bear was able to kill.
Oh, from the youths.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've moved forward. So it's deceptive because I sort of did say to everyone, try and get through 1st and 2nd Kings, given it is one book. Tonight, though, we're really only going to be covering the content from 1st Kings, but that's fine if we're going to reference 2nd Kings. We'll do Elisha next week, though. But yeah, that's another example of a question that Brian raised around what was it called, like the motive or the of the prophet, like the disposition of the prophet.
That's an early church thing.
Okay.
So New Testament thing.
All right, but I think it's still a fair question.
Why was he being sarcastic about it?
Yeah.
And having a go at the guys. Throw a bit more water on it.
Okay, so
is that all you got?
Elijah, the story of going against the prophets of Baal.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, so sorry, we're talking about two different examples of a similar kind of behaviour of God's man on the ground. So you've got two prophets, and one is calling bears out of the woods to kill the youths.
But that was a valid response to a taunt. But go up, you bald head.
I think that's one of the most inspiring. I think it's one of the most inspiring scriptures.
There's four of us here who are in one chord.
The Lord really spoke to me
yeah. Well, there's a question around gifting here. So are these guys gifted despite their baldness? Yeah. Baldness is pure evidence of giftedness. It's giftedness of physical appearance, because God only made a few perfect heads and the rest he covered with hair. No. So the question is, if you've got someone who's got the Spirit of God, like Elijah or Elisha, can they manipulate the Spirit of God to their own ends? Well, that's an important question, because if it's a no, then God was right behind the bears killing youths. If it's a yes, Elisha just used the spiritual gift that he had to go and do something inappropriate. Now, are there?
But could it be that the prophets were, men of God, and there's an element of respect that should have been given, and it could have been justified that, I don't know.
Almost like coming into the presence of God willy-nilly. Yeah,
Don't mess with me, because you're basically messing with God.
Yes, and there is a massive distinction between the weight of responsibility that an Old Testament prophet carries as opposed to anyone who is harbouring the Spirit of God today, given that a prophetic word today that doesn't come to fruition doesn't result in you being stoned. Whereas in the Old Testament, that's exactly what was meant to happen. So it's like there's this weight of responsibility. You are the mouthpiece of God. Better not get it wrong. And as the mouthpiece of God, there would be an elevated sense of respect required when approaching them. So for sure, that I think all that comes into play. But I'm trying to wonder whether or not it's not like we've got a watered down Holy Spirit today. We've got the same Holy Spirit that He had. It does seem to function slightly different, but as close as we can get in the Old Testament to the New, and how the Holy Spirit indwells someone, would be the prophets, I think. I don't know if it comes upon the prophet or...
But they also, got massive respect wherever they went, because the people saw them as a prophet.
Yeah.
And they said, we cannot mess with this guy. If the kings were afraid of them, they could walk in and demand, attention, respect.
Okay, well that raises a different question a little bit, because I'm not convinced that they did command that much respect.
I mean, some people would have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them were, God specifically said, no one's going to respect you. And then there were others, like, I don't know if you call Samuel a prophet, he was leading the people that respected him.
Oh man, and so here's another whole problem. Because what is a prophet, right? Sam and I were talking about that this week. You've got the prophets like Moses is a prophet insofar as he is the mouthpiece to Israel of God. But he doesn't seem to carry the same kind of prophetic gifting that, say, Isaiah has, who is not only able to foretell the word of God, but to not only able to foretell the word of God, but to foretell it. He made predictions about what was going to happen to Israel 200 years in the future. So that's a different kind of thing going on there. But even the likes of Isaiah, they seem to be different to the kinds of prophets like Elijah and Elisha, who didn't pen anything down, but were sort of, sent specifically to go and get the ear of the king or something, and say, listen, if you blow this, you're sort of gone. Like, there does seem to be slightly different roles even from within the prophets.
And there's lots of little prophets that just get this little passing mention, like all the prophets in Jericho come chat to this bloke, or all the, like it's a profession almost.
Yeah.
Like there's lots of people that
hundreds
just,
of them. They're everywhere.
yeah, exactly. They don't have any famous deeds to call them, so they don't have their names mentioned in it. But there's prophets all over the shop. So God's talking to all kinds of people, or they say He's talking to them at the very least.
Yes, because it turns out it does seem to be more often than not the prophets that the kings are listening to are prophets that are just speaking to itchy ears. Yeah.
I agree. I think there were heaps of prophets in there. Because when Saul wasn't it when Saul and the Spirit of the Lord came on Saul, and when he met that group of prophets?
Oh, and then he starts prophesying too.
And then he starts, so that's when I think, so there must be, exactly like Nathan is saying, there must be everywhere. I think we only see a little fraction of it. There's also a story
Israel down the street.
where there's between two prophets, I can't remember, yet there are no names. But I was reading it or listening actually to it, thinking that's actually a cool story, but there is no name given.
There's the two in First Kings?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like the deceptive prophet and then the prophet from God.
1 King 13.
1 Kings 13, is that where it is?
So it's a relevant story, but no names. So I'm just thinking, I think there have been so many.
And it's interesting in that story that one prophet actually lies to the other.
Exactly, lies. And then the other one gets
Yeah.
Killed.
a lie. What? So you're lying. And then, you didn't listen to God, I lied to you.
I think
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's easy for us to
Okay, hang on. Let's do this one at a time. This is really good. Sorry, Holger and Marcos. Are you guys done with that? Because I think Tom was going to chime in.
Are they just being fast and loose with the word prophet? Did they just call themselves prophets? Or was he actually a prophet who lied? Or was he just some guy saying, oh no, God said that?
Geez, we might need to reread it because I have a feeling that God was involved in this one.
And because there were a lot of prophets that were telling like kings the wrong thing.
Yeah, so they would like pagan prophets who might have been saying, "I'm a prophet of Yahweh" or something.
Yeah.
Called
Yeah.
a man of God.
Yeah, one is a man of God, the other may refer to him as an old prophet.
I don't know. Well, okay, so let's just assume they both are God's men. I want to go back to the original question. Can someone who's been specifically gifted for a role, is that gifting, does God work in us or in prophets in such a way that the gifting only functions if you're doing God's will?
In the New Testament it says his gifts are irrevocable.
What was that? Sorry.
There's a passage where it says his gifts are irrevocable.
A lot of what Samson did was when God's Spirit came upon him, but he was doing the wrong thing by his oaths to do it. Like, he killed 1,000 men under the influence of God's Spirit while touching
Something
a dead
dead.
creature.
Yeah.
That was completely against his own.
Prevention, yeah, to what is it, the Nazarite law, yeah.
They're still going to make mistakes, aren't
There's plenty of
they? They're still
examples.
humans.
Yeah.
They won't always get everything right. Like they might not listen
Yeah.
correctly or give.
Yeah, that's probably really important to keep in mind because often we do, as the mouthpiece of God, focus on a prophet and think, how could they have done such a thing? And it's like, well, yeah, they're still.
It's like a pastor today. They might make mistakes, but they're still humans.
Well, that's the application, isn't it? And even maybe not even just the pastor, but say whatever the spiritual gifting is that it is that God's given you. You can be a gifted communicator and be a great teacher and just ruin kids. 20, 30, 40 years, you completely ruin kids because you've been given this powerful weapon, a sword in your mouth, and it just
There's a really well-known prophet that just had incredible, proven prophecies. This is in the 80s, 90s, and then he got done for homosexuality and just lost everything. But he was, so the anointing was still on him, and I've heard people teach that you can still be in sin and at different stages and still be able to be prophetically accurate.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation.
If God's given the gift, I'm pretty sure he can take gifts away from people as well. If they've used it or
Yeah, well, okay. So what does he take away though from these guys and these stories? What is he taking away when he takes something away?
His presence.
Okay, yeah, but I'm meaning, a little bit more material.
The land.
Yeah, it's kind of their land or their power, but it doesn't seem to, or their influence. But it doesn't seem to. I don't see him taking away the gifts so much or the anointing as much. I don't know. It's like
It's maybe more giving him a bit of a warning, similar to Israel, or like, let's look at David, don't do this, but still there's grace and there's time to actually change. And then David, being a man after God's heart, apparently changed, he did a few things wrong, but he got most of it right. So then all the other kings come, they're doing also the same things, maybe similar things, but for whatever reason, they're not changing.
Yeah, well,
so God doesn't take straight away, he gives us.
heaps of warnings. I think, I can't remember which book we read. It must have been Deuteronomy, surely, establishing the law that God would never punish anyone without warning them first. That's the story of the Old Testament, the historical narrative. It's just God warning and warning and warning. And that's the role of the prophets, by and large. is warning, 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 warning. But even as an example, who was Jezebel's husband? Ahab. So he was a nasty piece of work, right? But even he repented after he killed the vineyard owner. And God,
because he did that, God allowed him to live a long life.
Yeah.
And then
So the
his
kids.
son copped it.
But at least in this one, it's not just and then the son cops it, but the son copped it because of his
the
sin.
generation.
Yeah.
What does Jezebel spirit mean?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know, but I've heard about it for the last 20 years. And it's like Jezebel is behind every woman that has even an element of assertive nature. Like all of a sudden Jezebel's turned up. Look, I shouldn't make light of it. There is a lot of teaching around the Jezebel spirit. And I'm not educated to really make a comment other than it seems to me that it might be a teaching that has been manipulated and used to sort of scare women from ever doing or saying anything in the context of a church. That might not be fair, because I've never been in a church where that's happened. It's just I've heard this. How many Jezebel spirits are there? There must be everywhere, because it's like anytime, yeah. Is anyone sat under Jezebel spirit teaching or know something that might be handy?
I've heard people talking about it, but I get the distinct impression it's just them saying, I don't like that person.
Yeah.
It's more rebellion, though.
Yes.
A rebellious spirit.
Kids to get it a bit, yeah.
I've read that it's several spirits.
Yeah.
And that's why it's an incorrect teaching to call it the Jezebel spirit.
Is it in general like Babylon is?
Yeah.
Then Jezebel is.
The personification of a rebellious spirit. That's probably its accurate origin for sure, yeah. So when I make light of these things, you've got to be careful to go and do the same, because I'm uneducated. But yeah, I've heard a lot of teenage girls have been hit with it. And it's just like, well, no, they're just teenagers, and so they're just rebellious and pushing boundaries. But yeah, if I can't get my kids to fall in, we'll give it a go. I'm joking. Okay. Anything? Have we heard from you guys up the back there? Anything special stand out this week?
Just that there was a period of peace when Solomon was reigning. Yeah, there was a time. It seems like most of the other time there was war going on. And obviously, just the big one in Solomon is how he acquired all his wives and concubines.
I'm happy to have this chat.
Yeah,
What was the go? Yeah. Did he even see any of them ever? Like, I'll catch you in 2 years' time.
Right at one wedding.
Yeah, he could have too.
Yeah, like how long was a traditional wedding over there?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Never stopped being weddings.
Okay. Well, so
No, you just need a sweet.
no, you just take a concubine.
It's where there's no war.
That's why there was no war. So what's going on? What's going
Is it a
on?
political thing? Like, I've married your daughter, so please don't attack my country. Please give me a wedding gift of this much building materials or this much livestock or food supply or whatever.
Even if the dowries rolling.
Sorry, mate.
Even if the dowries rolling in.
Yeah, that's right. I thought you had to pay. I don't know anything about dowries, but I thought you had to pay down for a bride.
I don't know which way it goes.
Did it go the other way? And the money.
Yeah. That's why you want sons, not daughters.
Wow.
We have a lot of sandals.
Sorry?
We have a lot of sandals.
Yeah, I guess the front door had lots of sandals. Lots of high-heel sandals. I think Nathan's right. I mean, it's definitely a political maneuver.
But there are not 700 countries. There are not 700 kingdoms around him.
Very little king.
Well, they were all of royal so there probably would have been multiple from each community.
Oh,
But they were all royal blood, apart from the
city
concubines.
states. And city
Yeah,
states.
kings weren't kings of nations. Then they were kings of.
Sure.
You could have had a village of 1,000 and you've got the king.
So he was not very particular about that. He just took anything. He was afraid.
Well, when you're considering trying to shore up your boundaries, and again, this is interesting. Well, we'll get to it in a minute. Solomon actually, while David was able to secure peace in the land, Solomon was the only king that was able to establish boundaries that were described in Genesis. That Israel would run from the Wadi of Egypt right to the Euphrates. And on your maps, it's not going to be there because it'll be in your learning guides actually. I've got a spare learning guide here. If you go to page.
Is it 9?
15 will do, doesn't really matter. There will be a specific map somewhere when we get to it. But, okay, so the Wadi of Egypt, as far as I know, is where the Nile runs out into the Mediterranean Sea at its easternmost port there. And then, so the whole Sinai Peninsula was owned by Solomon. And even that right-hand, I don't know what you would call it, the little fork at the top of the Red Sea, he had a port there with ships in there. So he had a little fleet of ships sailing there, and then he also had a fleet of ships sailing through the Mediterranean. And then if you go right up to the southernmost river, up in the Mesopotamian region, that's the Euphrates. So he had that full portion, and he was able to secure that by now this is another thing I don't understand, by behaving in a manner contrary to the covenant, which was by marrying women from nations that they had been explicitly told not to marry.
And for being less for it.
Sorry?
Materially less for it too.
Yeah. Oh, no, okay, now, yes, Kelly, you're the best. So there's a design pattern here. Where else have we seen this design pattern?
And Abraham had his wife.
To yes, to the Egyptians. Who is Solomon behaving like? Yes, no, but okay, sorry. Okay, so Abraham does it, then Isaac does it, and then when Israel go into Egypt, they get shipped out with a whole lot of good stuff. There's a design pattern that suggests something about like Egypt and going there, and it's all disaster except that you'll get blessed. And the first wife that Solomon marries is from Egypt. Yes. Right? So there's something here, there's a design pattern here. Remember all this? Every time we hear Egypt, we go, oh, something bad about to happen. Yes, something very bad is about to happen, absolutely. But what also happens when you go down there and do the wrong thing? You seem to get really blessed. So, so what's happening is Solomon, even though he's God's chosen, he's being blessed, God's fulfilling his promises through him, but he's behaving like a Pharaoh, acquiring multiple wives, thousands of horses and chariots, building his army, all things he was told not to do. You're not to do any of this stuff. He starts behaving like Pharaoh. Yes, slave labour is another one. Heavy taxes. All of this stuff. So again, this is the richness of these stories and the importance of reading through these stories from where to go and go back again and go back again, because we're never going to, get to the bottom of all of these stories. But here again, we have this picture of, okay, something bad is about to happen, even though everything good seems to be going on right now. And because we've all read to the end of First Kings, we all know, don't we?
He does get told that, look, you've botched this up. You're only going to get continued peace because I've already made a promise to your father. So this promise is, like even with Abraham and Isaac back in the day, like the only reason they got out of that situation in a good way was because God had made a promise to them beforehand. Even when they dropped their end of the deal, he still fulfilled his end of the bargain.
Okay, good. So what does this reveal about God?
Well, he doesn't change.
Yes.
Keeps his promises.
Keeps his promises. And he repeats this, and I think even in Kings this is repeated. Even if you don't hold up your end of the deal, I'll hold up to my end of the deal. Certainly if it's not said in as many words, though I think it is somewhere, that's what is revealed to us as we get to the end of Chronicles. We'll do it first, but then when we get to Ezra and Nehemiah, we'll see it again there, that despite the fact that Israel persisted in their sin and rejection of God, their idol worship and sexual immorality, God disciplined them, and he disciplined them firmly. But he never, ever completely divorced himself from his people. And so while 1 or 2 or 3 generations had to live divorced from God, their children and children's children were kept as a remnant, and God was able to restore them to their land, Jerusalem. Okay, so we're here, we're in the period of the kings and the princes, the 500-year period from 1000 BC to about 500 BC before they get carried off into exile. These are very round numbers, just for the sake of keeping it in our own mind. But what's interesting to note is that from Abraham, the very first promise that Israel would find themselves in a promised land with lots of people and a nation that's going to bless the world, it takes 1,000 years with a sort of 400-year stop off in Egypt before they actually find themselves in that fulfilled promise and that period of peace that Sam was mentioning. But from that high point in their history under the rulership of King David, it's only 500 years before. What's fascinating though is it's another 500 years before something else very special happens. Yeah. So it's 1,000 years for the material, I guess that's probably not the right word, but the material aspect of God's blessing to come into fruition. But then the spiritual, and that's not a fair division, but you know what I'm getting at, aspect of that blessing to come into fruition took another 1,000 years. 2,000 years. Okay. All right. Authorship, it's not a big deal because, well, I guess it can be a big deal because it can influence how it is that you study the book at large, but no one really knows who wrote it. There seems to be a strong consensus that it was written at least while Israel was still in the Promised Land or just heading off into exile, because there are references to certain events and certain geographical locations that exist to this day. Now, for them to exist to this day, well, there couldn't have been destruction of Jerusalem and Judah. Otherwise, it would have all wouldn't have been there, right? So it sort of has to be in that period just before exile, and so it makes sense then that the suggestion of Jeremiah, which should be in there somewhere, Jeremiah may have been the author of the book, given that there's a lot of similarity in the words that are used, but that's not conclusive evidence because a lot of biblical authors borrow from other books. Yes.
And he could have pulled from other sources too, because it mentions a lot of, as to everything else he might have done, it's recorded in this other work. He will reference it for you.
Yeah.
He just includes the parts that are relevant for whatever theological points he's trying to make.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And again, if the book is written around about 500 BC, at that sort of turning point where the kingdom is lost and they're getting carried off into exile, there's about 400 years of history that Kings is covering, documenting. And so, no one's lived that long. So they're using other resources, absolutely. And they're directly referenced, that's right. They've got the Annals of the Kings and the Annals. There's 3 different groups documents that he's pulling from. And while none of those documents have ever been discovered through archaeology, as far as the textbook says, the different kings and rulerships, there are a number of them, in fact, that are referenced by other kingdoms, and that has been discovered in those different locations that those kings ruled at that period of time. So it offers a genuine authenticity to the historicity of these books. These historical events and characters actually existed. And some argue that this historical narrative, which it is actually the very first accurate documentation of history that exists in antiquity. So of any other nation, this is the first time that we get like a chronological layout of the history of a nation. And so when I've been talking about historical narrative, I've gone to lengths to say, don't look at this as if it's some kind of chronological order to follow to patch together the history of Israel. It is that, but that's not its focus. Its focus is to tell stories in such a way that it reveals something about God and how God behaves with his people and with creation. Now that's true of kings as well. This is a revelation of God and how he works in a nation with a vice-regent, even though very few of the kings function as a vice-regent. They just function autonomously. But certainly it is more of a historical layout because we get the dates, the specific dates and periods of time that each king ruled. In fact, here it is. The way he does that is through this regnal formula. And you may have picked this up, especially if you have read the whole way through. You would have picked up that every time a king is mentioned with a short description of who he was and where he came from and when that took place. And then there's this evaluation sentence, which if he was from the south, he would be weighed and measured against King David. And he was either good like his father King David, or he was bad, unlike King David. And of the kings of the north, he was weighed against Jeroboam. And he was a bad dude. And it's like he was bad. Well, all 20 of those kings of the north were bad. So the evaluation is always, he was just like Jeroboam. He was hopeless. And then you get this verification of the facts. It's like, if you don't believe me, you can go and find it in other places. Which is kind of how we write today. Hey, we make a claim, we give a bit of context around the claim, and then we reference it. So it's fascinating that this regnal formula finds itself in 1st and 2nd Kings, and it repeats for each king. Now, I guess what we need to mention for those that aren't familiar with the history, I have talked through this a number of times, and this hasn't happened. Well, it has happened. It has happened in 1st Kings. In fact, if we just move through the content one by one, we'll get there, won't we? Okay, so we have King David in his dying days, much like Moses and Joshua and Samuel. He has these last words where he's able to say, look, if you just do it God's way, it's going to go really good. So why don't you do it God's way? Because he wants to bless you guys. And then as a result, we see that the next generations don't do it God's way and it all goes kaput. Well, David, he speeds up the process by not just saying, hey, listen, you've got to do it God's way and everything will go well, but then he follows up that conversation with Solomon with, so listen, mate, I'm about to die. Here's a few guys you need to kill. And he just lists off a whole heap of guys that he's got to kill. It's like, wow, this is the internal conflict that must go on in David's mind. As a man after God's own heart, who is just bloodthirsty, just wants to kill.
I don't think he would have. Because that was the way things were. That was society.
Okay, well, let me phrase it like this then, because you're very right, actually, that our modern sensibilities don't cater well to that kind of talk. But if I say, he says, obey God, it'll go well with you, and then he asks his son to do things that directly disobey what God's asked him to do. That's the internal conflict. But we've probably all, to some degree, experienced that or are experiencing that, or if we haven't already, will experience that, where there is this deep conviction that there's something you shouldn't be doing. Somehow you just get around to doing it anyway.
How old was Solomon when he became king? Was he young?
I don't know.
How old?
Yeah,
He
was
was
he young?
30.
Oh, okay, yeah, I was thinking.
Well, he would have had to be pretty old because David has him early, or in the middle of his reign, and David reigns for 40 years. So
Solomon's was 40
years. Yeah, and okay. Well, here's another motif. So 40 years because Saul had 40 years as well. What's 40 years? Yeah, it's a long time.
Wilderness.
Yes, wilderness. Wherever we see 40, it's something.
One cycle until you get the land.
Generation.
Jubilee is 49.
No. Well, what happens to Jesus in his 40-day fast?
Temptation.
Yeah, a better word than temptation.
Tested.
Tested. Thank you, Billy. So tested. It's a time of testing. It's a time of like refining, and it's like, okay, let's see how Saul goes. Let's see how David goes. Like that. Let's see how Solomon goes. So there's something even in that. And now look again. Is the author imposing the 40 years, or did God actually ordain the 40 years, and that's the way the story came out, and that those literary devices are there because God ordered history like that, or they're there because editors put it in there like that to try and tell a story? Well, we can't know for sure, but you can have an opinion for sure. Okay, so Solomon's in, but his sons, where are we?
Can I just ask one question about Solomon?
Yes, you can.
If he was the wisest man that ever lived, why did he stuff up?
Does knowing the right thing guarantee you'll do it?
So, I'm not paying to get many lollies, am I? Okay, that's a good question, because we had a conversation last week about like why God does things the way He does things. You remember the conversation? Like, why doesn't God just wrap it up? Why didn't God send Jesus the moment after the devil turned up in the garden? Like, why does God do the things He does? So on a philosophical level, it helps us understand the importance of like free will and free choice, and how. Sorry, Chase, we're going to do that. How. Well, for our finite minds, we can't conceptualise a way that love could exist if there wasn't an opportunity to choose not to love. Yeah, but that's not what the conversation was about. Sam, do you remember? Because I think you might have been the catalyst for the conversation. Why doesn't God just come now? Or why did He let all these things happen the way? Why did He let these things happen over such a long period of time? Could not have He circumnavigated a lot of bloodshed? He does have a plan. What is the time period revealed? Yes, yeah.
People weren't ready to accept the plan, even in the little parts that had been revealed so far. They still struggled to follow even those little things.
Yeah.
I wasn't evil enough.
Yes, that's kind of the patience things too. He's allowing us to get really in before he does any smiting. Okay, so we were talking about the whole idea that God gives us every single opportunity we could possibly ever want to try and do it ourselves. And it's like He has revealed through history that you can try prophets, priests, kings, ain't gonna work. You can try, war, you can try peacetime, ain't gonna work. God set a promise to redeem the world in chapter 3 of Genesis, right at the start. And we're all looking for it in the stories. Oh, is this going to be it? Oh, Joseph, he was a good man. Maybe, no, not him. Moses, not Joshua, he's going to, no, not Joshua. The judges, Samson, look at this, definitely not Samson. Samuel, as a kid, he can hear from God. He even had the figs to go and tell Eli, mate, you're dead. Samuel's going to, nope, David, finally. This is how God is going to restore. Nope, not David. So, what's one thing that we haven't tried to fix the whole world? The wisest man who ever lived. He couldn't fix it.
And his last comment was in Song of Solomon, everything's meaningless.
Yes, well, Jess is going to help us understand that in a couple of weeks, next term. Yeah, but
So he knew everything, but then he's just going, it's all pointless.
Yeah, well, pointless without something, yeah.
He wants more to rely on Him, not a king or a judge or whatever. He wants more to look to God. I don't know whether the truth or not.
Yeah.
But, just accept.
Well, see, so except that he literally embodies the way. He doesn't know the way, he is the way. He doesn't know the life, he is the life. He doesn't know the truth, he is the truth. He is salvation. You know, like that's why we put our faith in those things, because those things are Jesus. That's his substance. I don't know if that's the right word. And essence, is that the word we're looking for? And so humans, if we were to just canvass this history, would be able to decide, okay, stop everything, okay, political systems, no, it's not going to work. They've done them all. You know, like human wisdom, you can go and get 100 PhDs, it's not going to work because you're not as smart as Solomon. He couldn't even get a work out. You know, political alliances, wealth and armies, it's just not going to work, folks. There is literally only one way. I think that's part of the wisdom of Solomon, is that he was the wisest man, even he didn't have a hope in hang time. Okay.
So,
yes.
I would just said that God had a plan for all this. So, was it part of God's plan that we try all the different versions in our history and we always fail?
Okay, so maybe I should give you a premise. This is Andy's idea. I don't know I don't know.
It can't make sense to me. You know, reading this, it feels to me like God is always having, maybe the next king, maybe that's the one and he's going to make it. Or Solomon, maybe, he doesn't make it like that. But it's not only us reading and thinking, that's him now, but it's also God, like, trying another king and saying, I'm giving it to you and your descendants.
Yeah.
No, I take it. I think even to Ahab he said, I take it away from you. It means he gave it to him at one point in time.
Yes. Well, okay, so yeah, but those lines I think are more directly addressing the theological theme of reciprocity. This idea that if you do what I say, you can have it, but if you don't, I'm going to take it. And that's that Deuteronomy 28 stuff of blessings and curses. Do good, get good. Do bad, get bad. And that's not the revelation we live. That's not the covenant we live under now. And I don't know that that's also directly linked to. Well, is it linked to God's plan? There are different types of God's will. Oh, we need to break out our systematic theology books now. Like there's the knowable will of God, and there's the sovereign will of God, and then there's another will of God. I don't know the title of it right now. And it's not God's will that Ahab did those bad things, except that in his sovereign will, he knows that's going to happen, and he foreordains that to happen so that he can still achieve his ultimate will, which is redemption of all creation.
But doesn't the human factor affect it as well? Because he makes decisions too.
Ahab.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's speaking to reality. Like, that's the reciprocity thing. People, like, you can't just be flippant with God. Oh, I'm part of God's family. Or I assumed the throne or something, and so now I've got God's blessing. That's not how it works. What is the hallmark of love of God, relationship with God? Starts with O. Yes, obedience. If you love me, you will obey my commands. Depending on where you put your comma, that can mean sort of two things. No, it doesn't mean two things. It just gives you a holistic picture of what that looks like. If you love someone, you'll obey their commands. But if you love someone, show them by obeying their commands. There's kind of the two angles. You might not feel like it, so you would do it to show it. But if you really felt like it, you would do it anyway.
There's something in that Andy in Solomon. It actually says in 1 Kings 11 that he clung to these women in love. And it's that love for them then that leads him to disobedience for God, but obedience to their God. Because politically, yes, it might have been that element, but he obviously had a problem with these women and he loved them.
Yeah.
Otherwise he wouldn't have followed them. If they were just possessions that he took, they never would sway him.
Yeah. That's true, and the author's not going to put something like that in there if that's not like an explicit statement. Yeah, so
But that's
how do you love 700 women?
The wisdom thing, and then
It comes after.
but then he's influenced by the love for these women, and it overpowers him.
So are we looking for like a carnal explanation as to why he could go that way? If so, that's it. Like this goes both ways, men and women. It's written in in the women deceiving the men now, but we all know we've done ridiculous things. Well, it's probably a good. Yeah, we all know I've done ridiculous things. Yeah. And you were so gracious through those years, Dave. I don't care what you said. You're coming to work. Yeah, and you'll act like you just do all kinds of stupid things. Hollywood makes all its money telling these stories. So yeah, there's a very good carnal reason as to why I don't know what it is. Reason why Solomon fell so sharply. One woman could make you do something pretty stupid. 700, right? Yeah. Heaps of stupid stuff. That's good. Okay, so Solomon, he gets his wisdom, then he starts breaking all the rules. He manages to unify the land and raise up a public workforce. Well, that's not what's meant to happen. Samuel said, people, if you get a king, he's going to put you guys to work. But you don't want that to happen. So he does good administration. He just does it the wrong way. Then he has foreign relations. So he develops peace in the land, not by expelling all the other cultures, but by okay. Then his military. All right, they were never meant to establish a large military. David was always told to hamstring the horses of the opposing men. You don't take those horses or those chariots. You don't need a big army. I'm your God. I'll fight your battles. You all know the story of Gideon. And then with the economy as well, look, they had the advantage of being in that what's that, apex? In the middle of two something or others? Like Africa, Europe, Asia, they all have to go through the Fertile Crescent to get to where they want to go. So you've got that advantage. You don't need to be accumulating piles of wealth. And that becomes their undoing in the end. Babylon find out all about their wealth. This tiny little kingdom in Judah, it's like... Anyway, but we'll get to that. Okay, so under Saul, the kingdom is basically functioning like this. Now, you've got different maps, but I can't pump out 1,000 maps. You'll just remember there's this little pocket here around Jerusalem that was inhabited by the who? Jebusites. That's right, they couldn't get rid of the Jebusites under Saul. And then they also had a little pocket up north as well that they couldn't get dislodged. David manages to do that. He gets rid of all the Jebusites, sets up his kingdom, his palace, whatever, in Jerusalem. But under Saul, he ends up taking Edom, Moab, Ammon, Aram, Damascus, right up to the Euphrates River there. And so they've got this huge amount of land. It's like it's all going good. Solomon's really wise, and he gets to build the palace, or the temple for God that David wanted to build. But David couldn't build it. God said, because
your hands are too bloody.
Yes, you killed too many people. So we'll get your son to do it. He'll be peaceful. This is an artist's impression. No one really knows exactly what it's like. Every artist's impression seems to have the cherubims looking like Egyptian sphinxes. I don't know why that is. Someone here might know. I would have thought that this would have been a palace unlike any other ancient Near Eastern or Mesopotamian temple.
Bible Project guys did a video on it, and they said all of the angels personified different animals, like the seraphim were snakes. So
yes, yeah. Well, I don't know. The cherubims on the Ark of the Covenant, you can see. Well, it's a really blurry picture there, but every other image we've had of that is certainly not a lion. Anyway, I mean that's besides the point. The fact is, the inside totally plated in gold, pretty special, and that's it. No, it's not necessarily important to understand. But Jesus makes a prophecy about this temple. Do you remember what the prophecy is? It'll be destroyed, yeah, but something very specific. Well, yes, before that, he's just not his prophecy that he'll rebuild it, but what happens to it when it gets torn down? Yes, that's right. Who is it? You, Chad? Yeah, no brick will be left on top of another. So when you burn down a temple, all the gold, remember where I heard this, runs out and runs into the seams of all the bricks. And to extract all the gold, which is exactly what the Romans did, well, you've got to dislodge every single brick.
I think you've also got to acknowledge the traders of the world. Because how could you build that joint without using a hammer? Remember, you know how they couldn't make any noise and they had to.
But did they do it off site though?
They did. Try installing that without using any noise.
I've seen the block. It's, man, like building's easy.
Just get a pinch bar to move this. Clink and.
Well, painful. How long did it take them? 7 years to build? Imagine you had a customer and he's
No
like,
tools. You couldn't use, unless they used ropes.
yeah, I would say that if you're going to pull up a pillar, you've got pulleys and ropes.
But what trade doesn't have a hammer?
Well, let's give him a bit of a break. That was just obeying God.
Hey Andy,
Yes.
just a curiosity thing. In Brazil, they rebuilt this temple.
Yep.
Have you seen it?
Yes. I actually downloaded the YouTube link to the. Before they built it, they did a CGI image of it, and I had that, but whatever the program is on that computer, it won't play videos of this PowerPoint because I have to convert it from PowerPoint to PDF. Sorry. But yes, if you want to go onto YouTube, you can YouTube all sorts of different computer animated versions of the temple, and then you can also go and check out what they've done in Brazil. Yep. Okay, so David says, "Come on, Solomon, you're the man for the job." Solomon has a good start. He wants to be a wise guy. He builds the temple. He's blessed abundantly with his land and with his kingdom. But unfortunately, things all start to go haywire. We talked about the fact that he enforced labour, and then he had that internal pressure building because of his sin. He was forewarned. Well, the kingdom now is going to split. It won't happen to you, but it'll happen to your kids. But he also had the external pressure of nations as well, and you will have read about some of that. And then the idol worship that came as a result of his sexual immorality with all those wives obviously started to unhinge things as well. So after Solomon dies, it says Rehoboam went from Shechem, for all the Israelites had gone there to make him their king. So Rehoboam, he was from up north. He managed to gain some ascendancy with the tribes up north. Another thing to mention, where I've drawn up these dividing lines, I've done it on top of the previous map, which showed where the different tribes were given land. There is no reason to believe that the tribes stuck to this, especially given that Dan never settled there, because the Philistines drove them out, and they ended up settling right up on top of Naphtali. So, and then Simeon, who is surrounded by Judah, joins up with the northern tribes of Israel when they separate anyway. And so, again, there's nothing to suggest necessarily that they ever really hung out down here with the Judeans. They may have settled somewhere there. I've just done that so that we've got some consistency around the maps and getting your head around where the dividing lines were. But essentially, if you were to draw a line across the top of the Dead Sea to the Mediterranean from their south, that just became known as Judah. And Benjamin was included in that because Jerusalem's up in Benjamin. That was the capital. And it was a fledgling tribe anyway, given what happened at the end of Judges. And then all the other tribes from up north, they formed the northern tribes of Israel, and they got together under Rehoboam. Oh, okay, yes. And so while Rehoboam had Jerusalem, Rehoboam hung out down here in Judah, and he managed to maintain rulership from Jerusalem. It was Jeroboam who went north. He set up a place of rule at Shechem. Now, someone tell me something about Shechem, because we haven't talked about Shechem. And it came in, I think, Joshua. Something special happened at Shechem.
The ark of death.
Tom's there. Okay.
They've got half of Israel up on one hill, half of Israel up the other hill, and they shouted the blessings and the curses.
So do you remember that? So Moses from Deuteronomy commanded them, once you go into the promised land, half of you go up and shout the blessings, half of you go up and shout the curses from the two hills, Ebal and Gerizim, I think those two hills are called. With Shechem is the little city that's in between the two hills. There's something ironic about where he set up his place of worship. It was that first place where they reiterated the law of God, which they were now operating in direct opposition to. Anyway, okay. So what happens from this point on in the history of Israel is that Judah becomes known as Judah, the northern tribes of Israel become known as Israel. Some of the prophets might refer to them as Ephraim from time to time because it becomes a big tribe. That aside, the history of the kings now in 1st and 2nd Kings is told simultaneously, which makes it really hard to navigate which king they're talking about at which point in time. And when we get to the prophets, I'll actually give you a handout of the different kings from the north and from the south. One, so that you can see them separated and categorised, but two, so that you can find out which prophet was operating at which point in time of the kings. Anyway, here's a list for you now on the PowerPoint. You've got 20 over here, 20 kings. They only last disobeying God for until 722 BC, before the Assyrian Empire comes in and takes them captive and then does something peculiar. The Assyrian Empire had a way of dealing with nations that they would conquer. Rather than getting the people from that nation and bringing them back to their capital, they would just take portions of the people from that area to different places around their empire and force them to intermarry with different people from different locations. Then they would get other people groups from their empire and force them to move into the captive land to again force intermarriage. And what it would do was it would water down any kind of family connection to a particular religious or political system. And so the Assyrians, I think it was quite genius, they basically then were able to, one generation in, get the allegiance from their people. And so I think we might have a map. We don't. In your learning guides you might have one. Yeah, that's all stuff that we're going to... Oh no, page 15. Again, this is 2 Kings. So you can see the black arrow is the people from Israel getting dragged out and sent into different locations of the Assyrian Empire. And then the red arrows are different people groups from the Assyrian Empire getting imported into Israel. So that's what happened in 722 BC. But after that, the Assyrian Empire started to lose power. We won't go into the details of it, but Egypt had a fair bit to do with that. And while that was going on, Egypt and Assyria fighting, Babylon started to rise as a real genuine force to be reckoned with. And when we do the book of Esther, Tom's going to talk to us a little bit more about that. But it was the Babylonians then in 586 who eventually came and sacked Jerusalem, the southern tribe, the Judeans. Now they also had 20 kings, but 8 of these kings were actually good. So when we read through the regnal formula, when it came to evaluating these kings against King David, 8 times we hear he did the right thing. He was good. There's a really good one in particular, Josiah. He reinstituted the worship of the Torah, or worship of God, worship of Yahweh, as set out by the Torah. Up until this point, we don't know for how long, but the books of the law had gone missing. And Josiah, as a young fellow, moves in the temple, cleans it out, and they go, oh, look, the scrolls of the Torah, let's have a read of this. And he's like, look what we're doing, we're blowing it, let's do it the right way. But anyway.
So how many of do you know which are the good kings?
Okay, let's see if we can do it. Josiah was a good one. Manasseh, not so good. Anyone? I think he's the guy that sawed Isaiah in half. Sorry?
There's a brief moment of redemption for him at the very end of his life, a bit like Ahab, but overall, yes.
Yes, and similar to King of Babylon.
Nehemiah? No,
No, come on.
no, like
He's like the stuff with the Z.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar. It's got Z's in it. Doesn't start with Z. Okay. Who else was a good one? Asa. He was a good one, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was decent.
Was Jehoshaphat good? His son.
Yeah.
Uzziah, I think he was a good one. Now, where you see these different asterisks, they're all asterisks that say these particular kings, their names and reign have been documented in other nations in the ancient Near East that have been found through archaeological inquiry, which is good. Saul, not so much, but David, Solomon, definitely. Now, over here, it's interesting to mention when we talked about the whole idea of reading these books not with a linear history kind of mindset, trying to work out the chronological order of things, but a theological mindset. That is really well exemplified by the fact that Omri here from the northern tribe of Israel is afforded 6 or 7 verses. But of all the kings in northern Israel, he was by far and away the most powerful and politically successful, and his name does appear as kind of a big deal in ancient Assyrian texts. And in fact, the Assyrians during his reign weren't referring to Israel, they were referring to the house of Omri. So you would think, again, if the author's intent here was to give some kind of, just cardboard history of Israel, Omri would have got all the talk. But because he didn't do anything by way of, impressing the people toward God, he sort of just gets sidelined, which is fascinating. Anyway, so yeah, our Judean kings, they all exist here. It's under Zedekiah and his arrogance and reluctance to listen to the prophets that Nebuchadnezzar is able to lay siege to Jerusalem and over a period of about 30 years, they take 3 groups of Israelites out of Judah and into Babylon. So they've got a very different way of exiling people than the Assyrians. The Assyrians interdispersed them and intermarried them, whereas Nebuchadnezzar, due to God's providence obviously, his idea was just get all the really good people, like all the old people and the disabled people, leave them, we don't need them, but get all the really good people and bring them into Babylon and they'll make Babylon really good. Now, if you do it that way, a people group can maintain their identity. And that's exactly what happened. To a degree, they were able to maintain their identity. And then we learn providentially that another kingdom arises, I won't tell you who just yet, and another king who has a good idea, he says, hey, you guys should all go back home. Okay, so during this period of the kings and this rebellion from Yahweh worship and the rebellion from the idea that they were to be the vice regent of God, kings, but only according to what God asked them to do, the rise of the prophets ensues. And we have God sending prophets to get the ear of kings to say, hey, listen, stop being such a clown. And we've got this impressive story of Elijah, who is challenging the prophets of Baal to a God duel. Who doesn't know this story? Okay, we all know the story. All right. What does this story have to say about testing God?
Testing or trusting?
Yeah, well, okay. That's.
You mean as far as Elijah's willingness to put the water on the altar and just make it seemingly impossible for it to start up?
Yeah, well, there's a discussion there. Okay, so what does that tell us then? Let's just do that real quickly. If Elijah is going to make it utterly impossible for God to burn up his altar, and then God burns up the altar, what does it say? About God. Yeah. That's the theme of the story, right? I'm going for a more implicit thing, like someone comes to you and says, oh, well, I'm not going to believe in your God until I get a sign.
we've had this with Gideon, haven't we? Right? Even though Gideon, from the story perspective, seemed like a bit of a coward and wanted like more and more elaborate signs that he'd already had proof that God still honoured that anyway. Like this is probably vaguely similar. Like God still seems to operate like that.
Then Jesus came. They're like, we want signs, and he said, I've given you signs. You didn't believe me anyway, so what's the point?
Okay, so does that changes things? That could change things. That could be like we were talking before. I've given you every option. I've given you everything you wanted. Prophets have raised people from the dead. Fire's poured down from heaven. Manna's come from you. Like it's like you've had everything, people. You're not going to believe it. We're moving on from signs now. Is that what Jesus is saying? I'm not going anywhere with this. I don't know. I find this confusing because I have had one story in particular. A young guy by the name of Will, very well-read kid, wants to believe in God with all his heart. He's even responded to a couple of, sort of altar calls at different rallies and then immediately got home going, I don't even know why I did that because I don't believe it at all. And then, he said to me once in the living room of my parents' home, if you could just ask God to raise that cup off the couch, that'd be, I'm all yours. I'm right there. I was stuck for an answer because he could have peddled out 100 stories from the Bible where God would do something like that. And if he didn't, I'm surprised he wouldn't have chosen this story in particular. Because it does seem like this is like a.
It's interesting though, even though they held the signs, they saw the Red Sea split open. They held the signs, but then straight after they forgot and wanted to go back to Egypt. And even Jesus said, we've seen all the signs, and the Pharisees, they knew, they could see that what Jesus was doing was pointing to the fact that he was the Messiah, but they didn't want to believe it.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah.
I think now we have the Holy Spirit. It's different, isn't it? The Holy Spirit came and did amazing things through the prophets, but now we all have that inner peace of having the Holy Spirit with us. It's so different, isn't it? I'd rather have that than all the signs and miracles.
I want to comment on that, but we'll just go to Sam first. Yep.
I know. I was just going to say, because just before that, Elijah had prayed and the land went dry for 3 years, didn't it? And then he'd prayed again that the rain had come. But I was just thinking then too, there was all those prophets of Baal. What had? Because it was Ahab, and Ahab was with Jezebel, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So what had they seen those prophets do that gave them the authority to be a prophet too at that time? I guess if they had done stuff, it was obviously through the power of not God.
So yeah, well.
Well, they were worshipping like child sacrifice and sex and things like that. So what had they done? It's a good question.
Just the money power then.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you think about this stuff for too long, it does your head in. I think probably to say these are historical events, it's got to be demonic power. Like, just in my mind, I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying for this to make any sense, because they would have had... You're not going to sit there and slash yourself all single day in hope, like the prophets of Baal did, in hope that he's going to rain down fire, if you don't think it's going to happen.
Or you haven't experienced something like it before. They've obviously done that, and that's what's working.
Yeah, that's right. But is it a this is scary. I don't believe this, but is it a story of moderated truth? Is this a metaphor? Or might be the right word, or an analogy? No. What's the word? It starts with A. Allegory. That's it. It's like it's we all have idols, and say for instance money. It never satisfies. We know it never satisfies because we can never have enough of it. Yet we keep going after it, right? And so the prophets of Baal are the, capitalists of today or something. It's like they're just going after more money, going after more. And it's like, in its worst form, capitalism, it's just the best. Okay, thanks, Dave. But in its most abused form. And it's like that becomes your God and that becomes your idol. And someone can come along and offer you something better. And even though you know that the money has never fulfilled you, you're still willing to just chase the money because you're not willing to submit to whatever it is that you've been offered. And from the Christian's perspective, it would be the Holy Spirit. Way better. An indwelling peace and comfort. So is that the moral of the story here? It's not necessarily that this is a story for people who've been possessed by the devil to go and follow some pagan god, but it's for a secular society who've abandoned their moral compass or seared their sensibilities to any kind of spiritual realm, and they're just pursuing the material.
And why would Jezebel want to kill him? It was purely allegorical. They couldn't have killed all the prophets of Baal. And then she said, I will do to him, and he's like, even to them.
Yeah, and then he had to cry. It's a good one to preach on. We all love this story. It's because he just does the coolest miracle of all time. Like, kills, 1,000 or however many, 400 prophets of Baal. And then Jezebel is like, I'm gonna kill you. And so he runs away into the desert and cries, oh God, I can't do it, I'm all alone. And God's like, hang on a second. Didn't we just totally hammer those guys?
Well, it's what we were just talking about, isn't it? The miracles don't seem to have a very large
Yeah. Didn't that?
So the question then, if we began to see miracles to that, sure people see miracles, but to that extent, that really changes in today's society.
Okay, so this is the comment I wanted to make on what Jacqueline had to share.
And there are a lot of documented stories in missions, places where there's missions going on, where there's power encounters against animistic spirits and, in the highlands of New Guinea and stuff, where
But
similar things
my
happen
argument
like that.
in our society, because it's so secular and no one believes this anymore, I believe that the devil purposely prevents from the manifestations of things because it would cause people to believe from the demonic perspective, but because in these African areas it's so open and everyone totally believes in it, so it's manifested everywhere. But I'm just saying, if there was miracles like this today by prophets, how much would it change things?
Oh, 100%. That's the skeptic's biggest tool is, faith healers. Okay, why are the hospitals full of people that are sick? They've got a good argument. If there's someone with a genuine gift of healing, and I'm not saying that they have healed through faithful prayer, but someone who's actually got the gift of healing, like someone has got the gift of, I don't know, it's a really tangible gift. Speaking. Then that healing would just be literally walking through, healing everyone, and that remains to be seen. It could happen for sure. It would. I don't necessarily know that it would directly equate in more people accepting Jesus. It would just be more people accepting the spiritual realm, and then pagan worship becomes a real thing, or occultism or whatever. That becomes a real thing. Whereas we're all just bound up in materialism and secularism, and I think you might be right. Satan's kind of like, oh, that'll do. I'm not going to turn up there. I don't want anyone to know that I'm real. If they know I'm real, then they can start asking questions about Jesus. Okay. All right. So I think there might be something even in the fact that Elijah called for a drought, given that Baal was from Canaan, the land of milk and honey.
Was he a rain god?
Well, Baal, it says in one of the textbooks I was reading that he was a rain, he was something, rain, weather god, something like that. It wasn't fertility, that was Asherah. But anyway, this particular Baal, because remember Baal is a generic term for the pagan gods of this area, so there were different ones for different locations. But then the desert god, from where all the Israelites come from, out of the desert, he comes in and causes, the rain to stop, and it's like, oh man, yeah, he's doing his thing. But then he can also cause the rain, and it's like God saying, I'm not just a desert god, I'm an everything god. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Elijah, the fact that he did some pretty impressive things. He did 7 documented miracles when Elisha turns up on the scene. He asked God for a double portion of the spirit that Elijah had, and then does 14 documented miracles, which is interesting. But we'll get to that as we move along. We've talked about how Elijah, after that incredible miracle of calling down the fire from heaven, he went and had a run off into the wilderness, and then the Lord sustained him, and so he got back on his horse. Okay, yeah. So now this is these narratives around Ahab and Ben-Hadad. They're all the jockeying from the external nations up the north around. Judah manages to convince Assyria to have a go at Israel so that they can have a little bit of peace. And Assyria do that, and then somehow Israel and Judah start being kind of mates again, kind of being friends. And there's this other, Sam mentioned that under Solomon there was a period of peace. Well, here's another really peculiar just period of what seems to be peace. And because Kings finishes here in chapter 22, the story doesn't finish here. It's a bad place to end the book. As we go into the start of 2 Kings, the narrative just keeps on going. And we find out exactly how it is that Assyria finally, manages to take out the Israelites, but somehow when they get to Jerusalem, they can't get Jerusalem. So the providence of God is functioning there as well. Roy also at the top of the class mentioned the fact that Naboth's vineyard was, sort of requested by what's his name again? By Ahab on behalf of Jezebel, who was from Phoenicia or Sidon, right up the top of Israel, and she obviously didn't understand the law very well, because when Ahab asked Naboth for the land, he's like, well, I can't sell my inheritance. It's the law. I can't do that. And he goes, oh, fair call. So he chuffs off back home to Jezebel, and she goes, oh, well, I can fix that. Well, just kill him. And so they do. Anyway, he's offered an element of grace there because he repents. And I think for me in particular, when I look at Solomon, in that he knows what to do and does the wrong thing, and Ahab is like way worse than Solomon, he just has got to humble himself and come before the Lord. Like, for me this week, I think that was the most encouraging thing. I was driving back from Stratty, listening to this part of the narrative, and I was just like, I get so... Sometimes I genuinely think to myself, his patience is going to wear out on me, hey. He's got to be fed up. He gives me the privilege of being able to preach and speak, and I'm only becoming aware just recently of the fact that people listen to what I say with an element of like, oh, he's coming from a place of authority, and it's like, well, I guess I've wanted that. I never wanted that, but I guess if you want to be a preacher, you want that. I don't know. But it's scary, It's like, wow, people that are going to listen to what you say, and you say one thing and you just do the other. Like, not okay. And our good and gracious God has seen fit to reveal his patient and forgiving nature, even in the worst of people, which is a huge relief for me and a genuine encouragement to start letting my behaviour sort of look a little bit more like my preaching. Anyway. So it was a good book for me this week. Any final comments before we wrap things up? No?
I thought Ahab's repentance was a bit like David with Bathsheba, in the same way that
stuff I think spiritually grows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still got consequences like in that war he fought and all the rest of it. But yeah, he got praise as well.
Marcus?
This book just filled me with fear, like in a way of thinking like how can Solomon, like being wise and all these other kings, be led astray so easily. And I was thinking like, how can I not do that? Like, how can I live a life that I will not be led astray? Because I think we all here still have 30, 40, 50 years here in this earth, and it's a challenge there.
Yeah, that's so what.
I think the answer is in Solomon's words, saying that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and fearing Him more than fearing anything else will keep on track.
That's a fitting way to wrap it up. I'll pray. Father, we thank you so much that you've grown and maintained and blessed this class, not numerically, but certainly just within our capacity to see the truths that you're trying to reveal. And as I pray every week, Lord, would those truths genuinely move beyond just an academic exercise and penetrate our heart in a way that our behaviour is genuinely turned toward you and obedience to you. And might our heart also become softened toward you and more affectionate toward you. And Lord, we thank you that despite whether or not we on our end have any control over any of that, you are faithful in all of your promises. And we thank you and praise you, Lord, that while these guys were, in some ways stumbling around in the dark, you have revealed to us your true nature in your Son, Jesus Christ. Without that, we would be ultimately up the creek. So we praise you for doing that for us, God. Even if we don't have it all worked out. Maybe this week, as we push through with the second installment of Kings, would you just have those words of Solomon that Marcus reminded us of, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. Maybe we could just be conscious of that more this week. Amen.